for the following NBC News special.
NBC News presents Black Athletes, Fact and Fiction.
The black athlete. His dominance of American sport will be the focus of an NBC News special tonight. It's called Black Athletes, Fact and Fiction. Tom Brokaw is hosting that special.
Are blacks better athletes than whites? This is the University of California Irvine basketball team, and this is Dr. Gideon ARIEL, a former Israeli Olympic athlete. For NBC, Dr. ARIEL set up this test to evaluate jumping ability. He videotaped all 16 players, 8 blacks, 8 whites. The dunks were analyzed in his computer lab. The differences between the blacks and the whites were dramatic.
We're talking here about vertical jump, and that represents how much you move your body. And you see that in all cases, the black lines, which represent the black athletes, were higher or jumping higher than the white athletes.
Many broadcasters and sports fans of both races talk about blacks as natural athletes. Whites are described as hard workers who can't run or jump naturally. When you're watching television and you see someone described as a great natural athlete.
Yeah, I know exactly who he's talking about. He's black.
Why?
Because that's the racist attitude that blacks are natural because they're naturally lazy, so anything they get, they don't get from hard work. They get because God just gave them the right gene pool.
Tom Brokaw, good morning.
Good morning.
Your critics are going to say that merely asking this question implies a certain amount of racism. How do you plead?
They're already saying that, I think. Well, how we plead is that knowledge is better than ignorance, and there's a growing body of information, both culturally and biologically, that shows that there are some distinct differences that do exist. And what we try to do is to put that into a context, into an appropriate perspective tonight. We're trying to lift it out of the gutter, lift it out of the barroom so that people will know knowledge from myth. And I think that, on balance, that we have succeeded at.
Let's bring in Dr. Gideon ARIEL, who we met in that clip. He's the man who compared the strengths and weaknesses of black and white athletes. And Dr. ARIEL, no doubt in your mind?
Well, when I am analyzing athletes, I'm analyzing actually the forces, the laws of motion, how it applies to the human body. In this case, our research shows that certain athletes can jump higher or run faster, and with no regards to races.
But what about the regards to whatever cultural differences might exist? I mean, what would have happened if you would have taken a number of blacks from various backgrounds? Would you have seen considerable differences? Number of whites from various backgrounds. Among them, would you have seen considerable differences?
There are ultimate forces that control a particular event in sport. And any athlete, whether it's a white or black, that can meet this requirement will win. Of course, we can compare whites to whites. We, in fact, try to compare athletes in Israel to athletes in the United States. And in both cases, they were white, and we found out that the athletes in Israel couldn't even come close to the American athletes in the United States.
Let's introduce another guest. In that clip, we also met Brooks Johnson, who's the Stanford University track coach. This morning, he's at our San Francisco affiliate, KRON-TV. Good morning, Coach.
Good morning.
In impolite terms, you think this is just so much bunk, I guess. Why?
Well, first of all, I'm shocked that Gideon ARIEL, a world-renowned scientist of Jewish extraction, would be an apologist for this kind of an explanationist for this kind of an attitude, since Hitler probably had his holy men and scientists making the same kinds of studies to prove that the so-called Aryan race was superior to the Jews, the Slavs, and any other undimensioned.
That's a tough equation, Coach.
Sir?
I said that's a tough equation.
Well, it works. And the point is that whenever there is this kind of an issue that comes up, there are people that are going to rush to the forefront to justify and legitimatize something as heinous and as insidious as this stupid myth.
Well, Coach, you and I have talked about this as well, and what we're going to show in the course of this program tonight, and what we can't show in the brief time that we have here today, is the broad context, because there are some scientific studies now that exist in Canada, for example, on muscle biopsy. There is Dr. Molina, who's done the anthropological studies, and what we say is, and you have a chance to say your piece tonight as well, that all of that has to be put in the context of what happens, for example, in terms of inspiration for young black athletes and what happens in their homes in terms of role models and how they have an opportunity. In fact, they are inspired to develop what physical skills that they have. We also know that there are genetic differences within whites, that some white athletes are better in terms of their physical equipment than others, but that some of those white athletes may bring more dedication to the sport.
Tom, as that applies to this country, that's irrelevant, because basically, if you're talking about so-called blacks in this country, we're not blacks, we're Euro-African American, and as a result, we're not even a race. So what if, for example, that Dr. J's or Michael Jordan's leaping ability comes from the white genes that he has, or the Indian genes that he has, rather than the black genes? Wouldn't that be the ultimate paradox and irony?
What about that,
Dr. As a matter of fact, he is, and those athletes are not pure Africans.
Formulate the laws of motion. He didn't give it a race or culture or whatever it is. I'm a biomechanist. I'm analyzing the forces. What we found out that in a sprint event, in an explosive event, in the recent Olympics, the black athletes would excel. And that's sure, these are the facts.
But that's also, Gideon, Dr. ARIEL, you also know that's also a psychological and a sociological phenomenon which you didn't measure. I mean, those physical forces are the ultimate manifestation of an attitude and aptitude that's acquired socially and culturally. That there are white athletes with the exact same physical characteristics who don't have what I determine, what I call the sprint syndrome, who don't react as well or as fast or as aggressively. Those are acquired characteristics.
Well, you're quite right in that regard, Coach, and what we're going to show tonight is that it is this whole picture that does come together, and there are many complex parts to it. It is a very complex issue, but in fact, it now appears that there are some differences. We're going to try to put that in some appropriate context.
Coach, I'm going to have to leave something to be done tonight. Coach Johnson in San Francisco, Dr. ARIEL, and Tom, thanks very much. 10 o'clock tonight, and then you'll be back at after local news to talk about it
some more. There's a lot to talk about.
Okay, we're back after a break. This is Today on NBC.
Are blacks better athletes than whites?
The blacks, physically, in many cases, are made better.
Blacks do dominate the major sports. Track. Black men and women were the big stars in Seoul. 3 of every 4 players in pro basketball are black. They're 63% of the National Football League. Almost a third of the top stars in baseball. Blacks hold most of the major titles in boxing. This is a program about how that happened, how black males especially have made big-time sports a mostly black world. There are so many theories. Sportscaster Jimmy the Greek Snyder had his own crude analysis.
The black is a better athlete to begin with because he's been bred to be that way, because of his high thighs and big thighs that goes up into his back, and they can jump higher and run faster.
The next day, he was fired.
Why black athletes are so successful is a complicated and sensitive issue. Many people believe that it's racist to suggest any differences between black and white athletes. And many blacks are convinced that white people want to believe that the black athlete is physically superior but intellectually inferior. And what about a thinking athlete?
Well, we know damn well he's a white person because white people have the cerebral capacities that blacks don't possess.
I think it's to the advantage of the black athletes to be proud that God was on their side.
Tonight, we'll introduce you to scientists who believe, by and large, black athletes do have a genetic edge. We'll hear the concerns of blacks who believe that all of this is just one more manifestation of racism. We won't be able to answer all of the questions, but by the end of this evening, we will have a better understanding of the black athlete, fact and fiction.
Dr. ARIEL contends that the ability to jump is genetic, and it's not fundamentally altered by training. He issued this challenge.
If I will take right now 20 black athletes and 20 white athletes and let them jump from this table into a force platform, it's a plate that has a surface that can measure forces. And I'll tell you who is black and who is white, just by the reaction force. Go. Boom! Very good, very good, very good. Go.
So we took him up on that. All 16 players.
Go.
The results were stored in a computer.
Okay, that's good.
A few weeks later, we gave Dr. Ariel a blind test. We had him randomly put the jumps onto the computer screen and identify the player's race.
Here you see a definite black athletes. You see that there was a shock absorption here, and then there is increase in the force in the vertical direction after he hit the plate. If we look on this one, white athlete, no question about it. This athlete basically collapsing on the force platform.
Dr. Ariel identified all correctly. These and other tests consistently show that blacks are more explosive runners and jumpers. Scientists are divided over whether that means that whites are inferior athletes in general.
When you look on white athletes, they are very good in a power event, but different type of power event where you need to move heavy object at a slower speed, such as in the shot put.
Do you think by even raising these questions that it's a racist statement?
It reflects racism, yes.
What about the blacks who feel that there is some underpinning?
You have to understand the whole secret of racism and sexism and all these other isms is that the people who are oppressed end up spouting the party line of the oppressor. The whole idea is to convince black people that they're superior in some areas and therefore, by definition, must be inferior in other areas.
I know the American system is very sensitive to statements of blacks and white, but you cannot defy science. I mean, you cannot tell day is night and night is day. I mean, things are facts. I think it's to the advantage of the black athletes to be proud that God was on their side.
I'm sure all of this has raised many questions, so we'll be back after the local news tonight to talk with some of the people that you've seen on this program and others about the black athlete, fact and fiction.